O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts gathered in this place this day be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. The year was 1899, so it was a long time ago. And there were 4 newspapermen who had been sent by their editors to go down to the train station in Denver, Colorado, to try and pick up a news story for the Sunday paper. So these 4 men, their names were Al Stevens, Jack Tornay, John Lewis, and Hal Wilshire. And they sat at the train watching people get off, hoping that somebody famous and important would get off the train, and also listening for news from people who had come in from other parts of the country. But they spent the whole day there, and there was nothing. They got nothing. So after the last train had left the station, they all decided to go across the street to the Oxford Hotel for a little libation and to drown their sorrows. Once there, Al told the group that he was going to make up a story. He said he needed to have something for the paper, and so he was just going to make up a story. And they all started talking about it, and they decided that it would probably not be a good idea for them to each write individual phony stories, that they all needed to write the same story to give it some credence. After another round, the idea began to develop, and they decided that they shouldn't write a story about that was here in the United States, a domestic story, because those facts could easily be checked. So they decided to write a story about a country that seemed far, far away, one that very few people could check. They decided to write a story about China. Now, at the time, all 4 journalists had heard about the fact that in China there was a group called the Yiquan, which in English is translated as the righteous harmonious fist. Because of their closed fist symbol, Westerners said that they looked like boxers, and so they were named. This small minority of Chinese in China was suspicious of foreign influence, and they resented what they saw was the invasion of the West and Western culture upon their nation. However, most Americans had never heard of the Yiquan, and so the journalists thought their story would probably be safe. John came up with the story that they ultimately used. A group of American engineers had traveled through Denver on their way to China. They were there at the request of the Chinese government, who was wanting, according to this story, to tear down the Great Wall of China as a symbol of openness and welcome to Western tourists and trade. They didn't want to be seen as isolationists anymore. These American engineers were going as one of several teams from around the world to put a bid on that job. The next morning, all 4 Denver papers had on the front page this phony story. Perhaps the Times headline said it best: "Great Chinese Wall Doomed. Peking seeking world trade." To the absolute surprise of all 4 journalists, their story was picked up by other newspapers around the country and then around the world, even in China. Now, when the Chinese heard that the Americans were coming to tear down their precious symbol of who they were, they became angry. And the Yiquan just knew that they had been right all along. And so this group rose up, and they went to Peking, and they slaughtered hundreds of Christian missionaries from the United States who were living there. 2 months later, 12,000 troops from 6 different countries invaded China, for the reason of protecting their own citizen from the Yi Quan. All this became known as the what? Anybody from their world history? The Boxer Rebellion. That's good guess. All right. And we know it in world history as the Boxer Rebellion, which later historians would say was the cause of the weakening of China so that the Communist Party could get in there in the 1920s and take over. The late Paul Harvey told this as one of his stories on the radio. You remember when he was on, and he had the rest of the story. There's a book that's a collection of all those stories where he takes and reminds us of what is the truth and what led up to real historical events in our world. So besides this history lesson that we receive today, we can also see the connection between last week's beatitude, beatitude number 6, and this morning's beatitude. We learned last week in beatitude 6 that Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are those who are honest, sincere, openly genuine about who they are." We see what happens in this story when people are impure of heart, whether intentionally or unintentionally. When we live a lie, when we create a lie, when we live out this lie, unintended or intended consequences happen. We may move from being peacemakers to warmongers, as was the case in this situation. Now, all of us understand why the 4 journalists did what they did. All of us have felt that pressure in our jobs to succeed, to do well, to be a success in the eyes of those around us in our community. We want to be the ones who are noticed, who get the A+ on the report card. But our scripture today asks us, if we were to look through the eyes of eternity, which would we rather be seen as, a success on earth or a child of God? Beatitude 7 reads, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." Did you hear where Jesus put the emphasis? He didn't say peace talkers. He didn't say peace hopers. Jesus said peacemakers, those who act, those who create opportunities to make peace. Douglas Hare, in his commentary on Matthew, talks about how interesting this would have sounded to the people who were gathered on the mountain that day to hear Jesus' sermon. They were living in a time that historians have called the Pax Romana, P-A-X, meaning peace, the Roman peace. Now, this was a peace where Rome, with its military superiority, had conquered all the small warring tribal countries that had been killing each other for centuries, and they were living in a state of peace. They had pretty much stopped all piracy in the Mediterranean Sea and had gotten rid of those highway bandits that stood along the side, hid along the side of roads like Jericho, where travelers were being mugged at that time. They were able to create and keep the peace, but not in the sense of the word that the Hebrews had always believed. The Hebrew word for peace is, do you know that word? Shalom. That's right. Shalom, which means the harmonious cooperation aimed at the welfare of all. harmonious cooperation aimed at the welfare of all. That day on the mountain, as Jesus was preaching, the people knew that they lived in a state of false peace, that their peace was militarily imposed upon them. And truthfully, they lived in fear and worry all the time. Would the taxes that I'm having to pay Rome break me, send me into poverty? Would I be noticed by a legionnaire as he's marching through the streets? And would he ask me to carry his armor for him, as was the custom? Would I be wrongly accused of a crime and be sent to prison, maybe never to get out, or maybe to be charged with a capital offense where I would be put upon a cross, the symbol of Rome's capital punishment? In the face of such power, oppressive power, the people who were listening to Jesus that day knew that they did not live in a time of peace. Still, I'm sure the disciples that day, just like you and I do, I'm sure they yearned for real peace, that the world would really be in peace, that their communities, their families could live with that sense of security in their lives. We, I know, feel the same type of unease, the breaking of peace, whenever we hear things that come out, like came out on Friday from our government, which has cautioned Americans from traveling outside this country in the month of August because of the threats of terrorist attacks from Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. For years now, I have been talking to the Bible study group about wanting us to take a trip to the Middle East, to go to Israel, to go to Egypt, to see some of the places of our faith's birthplace. And every year when I start thinking about it, something else comes up that disrupts the peace in that area, which is such a holy land for us. You know, I don't know about you, but I've had daydreams. Wouldn't it be wonderful to get in a spaceship and just fly to the moon and be one of the first colonists on the moon, and to be a part of a group that creates a new society? Start over. I want to start all over. And from the very beginning, we just all have peace, shalom, as our basic way of being with each other. I just wish for that and daydream about that. And I'm not the only one who's felt this way. I'm sure some of you may have at different times too. But there was a couple, they had retired after many years of work, and they were anxious about all this stuff going on in the world, and they decided that this was especially back during the 60s and 70s, where there was all that nuclear war threat. And so they decided that they would look and do their research to see if they could find the place in the world that would be immune to any kind of war or attack. So they did their research, they studied, they traveled, and they found it. They found the place. It was a place far away from this country, that's for sure. And in the season of Christmas, 1981, they wrote their pastor from their new home in a place called the Falkland Islands. Now, those of you who are a little older know that in 1982, what happened in the Falkland Islands? Come on. No peace. There was a war, right, between Great Britain and Argentina. That's right. So their peace was broken in the one place that they thought would never, ever see war. That tells us a little something about, I think, the human condition. That there will always be, wherever we go, even if I live on the moon, there will always be places where there will be conflict between people, conflict between groups of people. That's kind of the nature of fallen humanity. The Bible doesn't tell us any differently, to be honest with you. But what the Bible does tell us is that we are called to be the repairers of the breach. That's how Isaiah refers to it in Isaiah 58. He said God has called us to be repairers of the breach and restorers of the paths on which we walk. Jesus took it a little more personally. When he looked at his disciples after telling them, after breaking their peace, when he told them that he was going to die, that he was going to be betrayed and denied, breaking their peace at the table, Jesus said to his disciples, "But gang, listen, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you." And then Jesus said this, "Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." You see, Jesus modeled for his disciples and for us that in the midst of life, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of anger, in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of disagreement, in the midst of dispute, we are called to step in as Christians and help make peace. He did this all the time. He did this in his daily living. We see it all the time. What are the two things we're never supposed to talk about in polite society? Politics and religion. That's right. The minute you bring them up, you're going to find that, Matt, you have a different opinion than I, and that you and I may not agree. And because both of them are so dear to us, we believe so strongly in our particular views, we don't want to talk about it with each other, right? Because otherwise, you and I might not like each other after it's done. And if we really disagree, Matt, you and I just might, who knows? Right? That's what we're afraid of. And so we avoid moving into those places of disagreement because we don't want to break the harmony, which feels like peace. But if we're not able to really talk and share our own visions of what we feel passionate about, is it really peace or is it a false peace again? Jesus took both those issues on. In Matthew 9, he ministered to a Pharisee's daughter who was sick unto death, even though that Pharisee was part of the religious group that was out to get Jesus. And in Luke 7, he went after he helped a Roman officer whose servant was ill, even though the Roman officer represented the oppressive regime under which Jesus and his contemporaries were imprisoned. Jesus felt strongly about his opinions, no doubt about it. You read them in the Bible. But he was able to see behind the words. He was able to listen to the rationale and the reasoning behind what people felt, to see the real person behind, to see the need of the person behind. In that way, Jesus was able to build a bridge from one side of a roaring, angry stream to the other. from the side of the Pharisees and Roman officials who were his enemies to the other side, where he was able to love and to care for them as individuals. Now, that's not easy to do. You know, Jesus said in Luke 6:37, don't judge others, and God won't judge you. Don't condemn others, and God won't condemn you. Forgive others, and God will forgive you. It's a beautiful, easy scripture to remember. But man, is it hard to live out. Just like that song, "Let There Be Peace on Earth." And let it begin with me. World peace, you know? It just sounds like a wonderful thing. And yet it's the hardest thing in which we realize. And being a peacemaker is very difficult, because that means we have to be the ones to listen. We have to be the ones open to maybe changing our minds or accepting differences in another person. Peacemakers have hard jobs. Just think, what's the most dangerous situation a police officer, an officer of the peace, has to face in his or her job? Where is that police officer in more danger more often than not? A shootout, but where? Hostage involved? Okay. The number one place, anybody else want to try? Domestic violence. When there is conflict in the home between two spouses or between a parent and a child, more often than not, police officers' lives are in danger, even more than shootouts, which is fascinating, isn't it? In those areas where they are called to bring peace to a place which was supposed to be peaceful in the beginning, right? Our homes. They are at risk in their own lives. Peacemaking is a dangerous, difficult kind of job. And so I think, none of these Beatitudes are easy. They challenge us to be more than what we are. But I want you to think today as we close about other people and places in your life that you think are far from bringing you peace or bringing the world peace that you can get. And I'd like for you to pray for those places. Praying is one way to make peace, for sure. But the other place is to really step into those areas of conflict. Don't avoid them. And to find ways to connect and to accept and to listen and try to understand. In that way, just perhaps disciples of Christ. You can also be called children of God. That's my prayer for us today.